Everyone, thank you so much for attending. We have Hope Payson with us today. She's a licensed clinical social worker, alcohol and drug counselor, and an EMDR AIA approved consultant who specializes in the treatment of addiction and trauma. She has over 30 years experience working in a variety of community settings that address the needs of individuals with histories of complex trauma. She was the clinical director for the EMDR Humanitarian Assistance Program for 7 years and remains an active volunteer. She currently coordinates a group of private practice in Winstead, Connecticut, while also offering consultation services and presentations internationally. This morning, the WSPIC group welcomes Hope Payson. Thank you very much, and enjoy the presentation, everybody.
Morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I recognize some of you folks that I've seen over the years, and some of you are Facebook friends that I've never met, so this is awesome. Anyway, here I am in my living room, which I've never spent a lot of time in except for the last 2 years. Like, wow, I love this room, right? With my dogs, so anything can happen. And I used to be felt awful about that. I would make my partner stay home, try to control the dogs when I'm doing presentations. And now I just don't care. So if they're loud, I'll mute. But it's such a great feeling. I was like, wow, I'm not shamed anymore. You know, I've had so many things happen when doing presentations. Yeah, a bear coming to the window, my partner deciding to get out of my way and sand the front deck while I'm trying to scream over the sanding, and then went out and yelled at her for doing it and didn't mute myself. So every adventure that you could have, I have had. And I'm psyched to be here today with you all because I feel like we have some common passions, and I think as a field, we're in an interesting time, and so this topic is of great interest to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the PowerPoint thing because we have to do that for some reason. It has to be the PowerPoint, but we'll take little breaks and talk a little with each other because I can't define some of the things that we're going to talk about today because they're in process, and through all of us, we're all thinking of how do you define long-term recovery? What does it look like? And what can we do as a system to make it more achievable for everyone? So I'm going to do the little PowerPoint sharing thing, and we will get started. All right. So when I was asked to do the presentation, I didn't have this presentation. I have a lot of presentations already made, so this is brand new for me. So I got to pick out, my favorite part of doing presentations is doing the preparation. And oh no, being asked. So I get a little dopamine surge when I'm asked. It's kind of exciting. Then doing the PowerPoint's very exciting. But then doing the presentation itself sometimes, when you're a little introverted, is not so exciting. But I had a lot of fun doing the slides. I want to thank you for showing up, first of all, not just here. I mean, you have lots of other things I'm sure you could be doing right now, but for showing up here, but for all the ways that you've been showing up probably for a very long time to help people in pain. You know, people who have histories of trauma, people have histories of addiction, and all the ways that you are flexing yourselves and the agencies that you're working with, and the folks to meet the needs of people who really need us. So I just want to acknowledge that it's tiring work. You all could have done something else with your degrees, but here you are, and it matters. What we do matters. We're supposed to today cover, what essential elements, help individuals with histories of trauma create a life based on their own unique recovery goals, and what systemic issues could be addressed, perhaps, so that more individuals can reach that goal. That's a huge topic. So we're just going to kind of go over the top of it, have a little talk about it, and hopefully come to some conclusions or have some deeper thought about what we're going to do moving forward. For me, the way I think of an issue when it's big is I like to break it down into smaller pieces. That makes it easier for me to figure out what some possible community solutions would be. When I think about the things that some of the folks I've worked with have gone through. It's been like a lifetime for many of disaster and recovery. When I was working agency-based work, I was fortunate that I got to work with people long-term. Now I'm in private practice, and I'm 100% insurance, Husky, and Medicare, and I also get to see people long-term. So there are some of what we're talking about is based on the setting where you work and what you can do in the setting you work in. So I'm fortunate, I get to see people when they come in crisis and do the short-term work to help them get into some stability in their lives, but I also get to do and have been witness to the long-term recovery and what that means for each individual that I've worked with. And I come from a family that has struggled with addiction, and I've struggled with my own issues with addiction. So some personal stuff, there's a lot of stuff I've learned professionally, and I've even read a few books, which I'll quote later, about addiction and recovery, not as many as I probably should have. So how do we define recovery? You know, we can look at it as stages, you know, the stages of change, trying to sort that out. What does it look like and what are we talking about? So when you think about long-term recovery, so I'm thinking here when I'm presenting, I'm thinking about addiction as part of the formula. And I'm always connecting trauma to that because I know we as a group kind of know that trauma increases vulnerability to addiction, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But also, whether you'd endorse that you had a history of trauma or not, when you deal with an addiction, there's trauma, because waking up in the morning and not being able to predict what you're going to do that day is traumatic. The way you're stigmatized is traumatic. The difficulties that you encounter because of your addiction is traumatic. It affects your self-worth. So what I wanted to do just for a moment is get a sense of from the group of what you think long-term recovery is or what it looks like. So if you had to come up with either pieces of it or maybe a sentence, what would you say? And I'm going to stop sharing the screen just for a moment and just talk with you. So what are you looking for when we talk about this idea of long-term recovery? What is the definition for you?
I would say it's a journey towards self-discovery.
Yeah, nice. So it's a trip, right? It's not just a one stop. It's a journey. Anybody else have their definition or words that work for them?
In terms of our clients, when we talk about long-term recovery, we talk about trauma healing, but we also talk about how it's fluid because their purpose and their goals are going to change over time.
Right. So it's ever changing, right? And self-defined, right? So everybody that comes to us may have a different definition of what that looks like for them. Anybody else have? Looks like we had something in the chat. Contentment and some level of fulfillment with coping skills. Yeah, an ability to deal with life as life is and be able to stay present for it. Any other things that people think about when you think about longer term recovery? Okay. Working on becoming the best version of yourself. Yeah. Perhaps finding who you might have been, you know, or who you would like to be despite what's happened, and reconnecting. Any other thoughts? Feeling less anxious and fearful of life in general. Yeah, so I think what you're saying, Jennifer, is like living in the now versus living in the past. Like being able to cope with life just now, not with all that faulty information or the information you learned because of your history. Or taking the best of your history. Seems intimidating to hear other people be in LT recovery when they are new. What is long-term? Yes. Ongoing process of growth, change, and challenge. Yes. Yeah, I think that the word long is challenging. What does that mean? When is it enough, right? When is it enough? What's the gate that says I'm in long-term recovery versus I'm in early recovery? You know, so I think that the word long is challenging. It seems like what we're talking about is helping people get a sense of peace and connection. And I'm going to go back to the screen share and continue. Just thank you for sharing and for your ideas. I think when you try to look at the issue of recovery, I think the question is, what are we recovering from? You know, and when I'm presenting, I'm thinking about trauma. So I'm thinking about what happened. Often when we think about trauma, we're thinking about interpersonal struggle, but often for many individuals, trauma is bigger than that. It's a community-based trauma. So some people have interpersonal struggle, but some have felt the trauma happened within their community and is an ongoing thing within their community. There's culture-based trauma. There's the impact of systemic racism. Some folks live with environmental trauma. I work with a lot of folks from New Orleans, and they are always fearful when there's a storm or a surge or water. That it seems very traumatic for them. So trauma is what happened, but neglect is what didn't happen. And there's a lot of that in people's history. Most of the folks I see have what we would call complex trauma or complex PTSD. And it wasn't just what happened to them, but it was what didn't happen. The failures and losses within their families, the systemic issues of not being offered treatment or getting it when they needed it, or being incarcerated when they should have been in treatment, and the injustice of the availability of services for some, which all of you are actively involved in, making sure that people can get what they need when they need it. And people, when we're talking about long-term recovery, at least for this presentation, we're talking about addiction, the vulnerability that folks have to compulsive behaviors. Some are more socially acceptable than others. You know, so most people have more than one addictive issue. So there's the issue of drugs and alcohol. You know, that's the one that we think about the most. But then there's compulsive work, perfectionism, a lot of other things that we do that are harmful to us, but that are more sanctioned. So I think of addiction in a broader sense as far as the harm it causes us. But people are recovering from that, the losses that are related to being addicted, the health issues that come with it, the relapses and the treatment failures, and how it affects the core sense of who you are as a human being. And so a lot of recovery is about getting back that core sense of who you were and redefining yourself because of your history. And the addiction, active addiction, sometimes makes it very difficult for folks to recover from their past trauma because it's an ongoing trauma. And it makes it very hard in treatment to help folks when you want to do some trauma-based therapy and they're cycling in and out with their addiction and not able to steadily attend. So when I'm thinking about what folks are recovering from, you know, I think about these factors. Because I can't not talk about trauma and what it is and what it means. I mean, I think everybody here knows the definition loosely of what it means. But I think I'm much more interested in not so much what it means, but how it affects each human being and how uniquely it affects each human being. Because that is part of long-term recovery, is trying to figure that out. What is my story? What happened to me? And how did what happened to me affect me? And how am I living it now? And what can I do to recover from that? So it's very unique. Trauma involves some sense of helplessness or entrapment or pain, but it isn't what happened. It's not the event, it's the experience of the event and how it gets encoded in our brain, and we'll talk about that a little bit, and in our being and in our body. It can be acts of commission, when you're looking at the DSM and you're trying to define what is, this PTSD and the things that cause it, they're often listing things that happened, but they don't often, we don't focus much on what doesn't happen. And that becomes very important as far as how traumatic events get coded in the brain. And we'll talk about that a little bit. There are other things though that are painful for people. So when I'm looking at the histories of my clients, I'm not necessarily thinking about trauma as much as I'm thinking about pain, because early medical problems, a mismatch in temperament between you and your family can be really difficult and painful. Bullying, learning differences, there are all kinds of things that also make us vulnerable and also can be traumatic to us or painful that doesn't meet criteria for the screening of some forms of trauma. But if we want to understand addiction, I think it's important that we study the impact of trauma and neglect, because that's going to be part of the recovery story and how that's going to be part of everybody's recovery journey. This slide is how I perceive what I've seen about complex PTSD or trauma with most of the folks that I work with who have addictive disorders. And I am seeing a segment of the population, and so I think are most people here. So there are many people that struggle with addictive disorders and don't land in the treatment world. You know, they get sober on their own, or they make decisions on their own about what they're going to do about their addiction. They don't come to treatment. They don't end up in agency-based settings. They don't end up with me in private practice. There's a great deal of people that are able to get sober on their own and define long-term recovery for themselves or find what they want. We're seeing a percentage of people. So the people that I see are folks that could not do it at home by themselves, or had multiple failures in other forms of treatment. And I imagine most people here are seeing that type of client also. Folks that have what I would call complex trauma. So it's a little more complicated as far as finding their recovery path, because it's about bad things happening. One bad thing happening. So if I think of the timeline that my clients describe of their life, bad things happen. But then after the bad thing, nothing happens. Another bad thing happens, then nothing happens. And meanwhile, you have a human being who's trying to develop, trying to go through stages where they learn how to be happy, where they learn how to be sad, where they learn how to pick a partner, and they are missing that. They're missing those developmental stages because they're busy trying to stay alive, trying to survive, trying to please someone who is dangerous, try to stay out of places that feel dangerous to them. So what we're seeing with our folks, or at least the clients that come in that I see, is bad thing happens, nothing happens afterwards. Another bad thing happens, nothing happens. So things like quiet times feel very upsetting because that means the bad thing is coming next. Neglect of skills, like most folks I work with don't have really good skills about reaching out for help because they learn when the bad thing happened. And often the bad thing was by someone they were attached to, that they can't trust others, that they can't trust people close to them, that they learn to only trust themselves. And this is what's so crushing about addiction, is that when you grow up like that, you're a human being and you are just primed to survive. So you're going to do what you need to do to survive. If you find people are unhelpful, you're going to look for other things because you have more chaos than other human beings. So you're going to start reaching outside with video games, food, different things to find a way to self-soothe. That's just normal human nature. Nothing dysfunctional about that. That's about surviving. But what somebody learns over time during that period will get coded and used later and retrieved as adults. And what's really super crushing about this is that most of the folks I work with promise themselves when they get out of that childhood that they were not going to do the same thing that their parents did, promise themselves that they wouldn't have an addiction themselves, and became somewhat defined by what happened to them. And want to be able to predict what's going to happen in life. And once you move from problem use of something into addiction, you can't predict anything anymore. So these are the folks we often see in treatment. You know, they come in, they have strengths and survival skills, but they have this incredible pain, and they have big gaps in developmental skills. So it makes for complicated treatment. And I just want to talk a little bit about the brain just for a minute, because it's so relevant to how we approach this as providers. When I am young in something, or even as an adult, when something very dramatic happens that I cannot manage in the moment, it's too overwhelming, I'm too trapped, I'm too powerless. It becomes a very bad memory. It gets coded differently than a regular memory. So say I'm a kid and something bad happens, and things happen to us all the time. It's not the bad thing. It's that if after the bad thing happens, no one explains it to me, no one soothes me or helps me get through it, I'm left to deal with it alone with my child brain, it's going to be stored very differently. So these dramatic memories don't get coded the same way. So they don't get stamped with the time. They don't say, hey, Hope, that happened in, 1965, you were 5 years old, and everything got better after that. I lived in a neighborhood, we had people break into my home. That memory was very dramatic and upsetting, but it was never explained to me by my parents, and I wasn't helped with it. And and now as an adult, noises at night outside my home, my brain says this is dangerous, versus this is like some lately deer walking through the yard and the dog going crazy. So the hippocampus will date stamp the memories if it's a good and optimal situation. But if it isn't, you can have memories that can pop open and open up at any time. So anytime your brain senses like a smoke detector looking around like, whoa, that looks a lot like what happened when I was 10, you can have a reaction, the fight, flight, freeze reaction that we see sometimes with folks. So how events are encoded are really helpful. And so this is where there's a piece that involves, the brain. So when I'm working with clients and they're telling me about their very strange reactions to things, like, I don't know what happens. And when a supervisor does this, I get in fight mode and I get very combative. I don't understand. We talk about what they learned about being powerless before. We talk about brain storage. We talk about how the fight reaction is not conscious, it's automatic. The smoke alarm went off in your brain. It interpreted this as bad because of what's going on in the past, or those past memories sometimes open up. So when we're working with people that are coming in, we're seeing some of this, some of the evidence of the trauma and how it's stored. For many of the folks I work with, it's intrusions like memories and nightmares and flashbacks. But flashbacks aren't always like they are in the movies. They're not like my client comes in, she's mad at me, and she's flashing back because I remind her of her mother and she's thinking of her mother. It's more like she comes in, she's a few minutes late and she's agitated, and something about the way I look at her reminds her of her mother, but she's not aware of it. And then we just start, she just starts fighting me in the lobby and we get into it. It's not like a full-blown flashback. It's a reenactment of something. Avoidance is a way to survive. Many people learn that the best way to get through life right now is to not let those memory networks open up and just avoid anything that might do it. So try to stay away from things that are going to be triggering, which is very difficult to do, particularly when the attachment, it was done with an attachment figure. So love can be triggering. People saying they love you can be triggering. Touch can be triggering. So people try to avoid things, the things that make life worth being here for, sometimes to survive. Then there's mood shifts and changes. I have to diagnose people so that I can get insurance companies to pay. I wish I had just one diagnosis, because the things I have to diagnose folks with that are really trauma related, mood disorders, things that look like what we call personality disorders, which is in my mind really just trauma symptoms, PTSD, different addictions. So there's mood shifts and cognition shifts that happen for folks because of the trauma history that can keep people alone. And there's reactivity, really, hyper startle responses, trouble with concentration and sleep. So when I am assessing my client's situation and looking at their history, I'm seeing these symptoms, and this is what makes treatment interesting and challenging, because there's a lot of it going on because of what happened, because of the way our brains work. For me, I'm looking forward to the day when we have this one diagnosis of complex PTSD. It fits. It fits if you think of the slide of the up and down, up and down. So if things are happening and they're pretty good, but then they're bad, pretty good, then they're bad, of course you're going to have trouble regulating your emotion. You're going to be triggered really easily. Different things are going to be startling to you. It's going to be hard to stay in one steady mood. Pockets of memory are going to open up that remind you of things in your past that are not pleasant. You're going to have trouble trusting people and staying in connection with people, because most of the disruption that happened during that childhood where there was chaos, or even adult experience trauma, is that we start to lose our faith in other human beings. And that is a big challenge as treatment providers, right? Is how can we as a system offer something that is trustable? I don't know, that's not the right word, trustworthy. How can we not mimic some of the things that happened to folks growing up and be reliable for folks? Attention problems and consciousness issues. So many of you have probably encountered clients that check out on you, who dissociate. That is a normal human reaction to chaos. What better way to survive than to freeze and check out? But the problem is that it worked to keep you alive as a child or when it happened, but it's not so great when it happens at work or when you're trying to participate in relapse prevention group or when you're doing an intake, and you're not able to stay present. That trauma will affect what we believe systems can offer us, what other human beings can offer us, or what we can offer the world. So what is impacted is much bigger than you see in the DSM. It's about a worldview. And as treatment providers, we're a big part of helping people heal this, to help them believe that what we have to offer is reliable and helpful to them and honors their goals. Nobody I work with who has trauma history does not have some kind of somatic issue or body-based pain. Super just important to notice. Most folks I'm working with are in a lot of pain, and the pain is real, but it's hard to diagnose in a physician's office. And that causes some more system issues for the folks I work with. In the past, they were all put on opiates. And now, of course, nobody I'm working with is getting an opiate anymore, which is helpful for some, not so helpful for others. And there's a sense of disorganization. So when I think about long-term recovery and the challenges, this is the type of client I work with, and this is what I feel like we're working on, helping people regulate their emotions so they can get what they want in life, helping them connect with who they want to connect with in the way they want to connect, helping them stay present so they can actually be in their life now, helping them navigate systems and be able to advocate for themselves and feel like they're in less pain, and they can have more control over their brain. Because for each individual human being, addiction is used in a different way. For some people, addictive behaviors give you a sense of belonging. They allow you to connect to others, or they bring a group in. You think about that intense drive, the herd drive that we have to be a part of the herd, and how teens can be so vulnerable if they don't feel like they have that at home, how they will do anything they can to belong. And it may be joining a group that does things to fit in, you get involved in. I think of addiction and addictive behavior as an attachment in itself. I think about how when you grow up in this chaos, you begin to trust things outside of you that can fix your pain. And if it's not a human being, they're not available, then you will find something to attach to, which is why you see grief and loss often when folks are letting go of things, because it kind of worked for them. I mean, if it really worked for them, they wouldn't be there with you. It kind of worked. It was better than what human beings can offer. So we can get very attached. If you think, we all have some compulsive stuff. We all have things that we're fond of that we probably shouldn't be so fond of, and how hard it is to let it go. Addiction can be used to avoid certain feelings. And again, broad definition. I'm talking about gambling. I'm talking about sex and love, and anything can be put out of balance. Anything can cause us pain, and all of those things can shift our feelings. I mean, how good do you feel if you're into social media and you post something and everybody loves it? I heard somebody talk about that as broadcast intoxication. It's just, and it helps you avoid perhaps a sense of loneliness and brings you a sense of temporary connection. And then you want more. So addictions can be used for addressing feelings, for self-medicating. They can be a part of a family culture, and to be different, to be sober would be to be different from your family, which can be very painful. They can help with trauma symptoms. I work with clients who in the spectrum have complex trauma, PTSD, complex trauma, and dissociative disorders. And those folks with dissociative disorders have parts that own different addictive behaviors. It's a coping skill that they've used to stay alive and survive. It can be a way to feel intense feelings. And for me, if I can understand why you're doing what you're doing and how it's working for you, then I can craft a treatment plan that is very unique to you. So I want to know when someone comes in, how does that work for you? What does doing that do for you? Because one person who uses crack does it for one reason versus another person who's doing it for completely different. And opiates, I mean, I have people who use opiates and they can clean their house. They have so much energy, and others that use opiates so they can pass out and fall asleep. So that is very unique, how different things hit our brains and why we use them. And if somebody has 4 different choices, which you usually do if you grew up with a chaotic childhood, like for one thing I cut, I will self-harm or cut. For another thing, I'll smoke crack. And for another thing, I'll drink. They're all different, right? So when I ask my client who does all those things, what do you cut for? How does that work? And she's like, it's when I feel abandoned and empty, I cut. Okay. What's alcohol for? Oh, it's when I hear like music, rock and roll music, and I think I want to be with a group and get a sense of belonging. Oh, and what are you using crack for? Says, oh, that's very different. That's kind of a certain people. I'm with certain people, and that's when I use that, and it makes me feel powerful. So there looks like somebody raised their hand, so I'm happy to answer a question. Julia, did you have a
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, I've never heard that before. Different substance for different pain in one person. Can people usually identify that? I've never ever known that before. That's news to me.
I use an assessment. Yeah, I use an assessment form for each behavior.
Okay. I know people will use different substances. I just didn't know that they identified them for different pains in their life. So I'm really intrigued by that. Thank you.
They don't identify it, but I ask them about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And later they're kind of we puzzle over it, because then we have to have not a treatment plan for each one, but we have to have a different
emails not set up yet.
Yeah, well, it's good to know.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you.
So understanding the relationship with them, with the drug, or for me, it's primarily drugs I'm working with, but there's also, most folks have behaviors of choice. Often they give up one and then go into another, which totally makes sense. So many people have social media and phone attachments, which, I understand myself. So I think therapists, counselors, people in our field, we have a little bit of a book buying thing, because we want so much to help people. Every time a new book comes out, we sometimes buy it. I'll be reading from a new book toward the end that I bought yesterday. I'm already highlighting it. I'm going to show you a very short video that kind of helps explain this. I'm trying to move the sound up. I'm hoping the sound will be okay. It's very unpredictable on Zoom. But I want you to, when you listen to this young woman talk about her relationship with opiates, it's a relationship, and I'm going to kind of warn you ahead of time. She's also talking about the loss of her brother. So there's a little bit of traumatic material in the video.
Because I really just, I didn't care. It's like, I wasn't actually going to kill myself, but if I died as a result of this, it didn't really matter, because all of any kind of self-worth that I had gotten in that small amount of time that I'd been clean was just gone, because I had relapsed. And it was just like, this is what I am. This is what I'm good for. That's that. And so after those 3 days of just hell, we finally get home, and I use again, because it really just is at that point, this is my reality. This is what I accepted myself. This is all I deserve. The day after we got home from Aruba, my brother Jordan, he had I think he was actually going on 3 years clean. And I had heard that he had been looking for stuff. And I was pissed off at him, because it was just you can't be fucking up too now. This is my time. You're doing well. Go do well. Why are you, why are you starting to use again? And he called me and I ignored his phone call. He left a message, and you know, it wasn't anything special. It was just like, hey, give me a call back when you get this. You know, and I just didn't want to deal with him that night. And then a few hours later, we had cops at my house. And, you know, I wake up and I hear these men's voices. So I think that, like, probation found out that I went to Aruba and that they send somebody there in the middle of the night to arrest me because, you know, that's what I just didn't, I had no idea what it actually was. And then I'm in the middle of hiding my drugs and I hear, you know, Jordan and dead, you know, and I come out and, like, my dad's just crying, and he just very simply just looks at me and just says, Jordan's dead. Like, he overdosed. He overdosed in a hotel, and they couldn't bring him back, you know? And then my mom comes out, and she just, like, tears down the hallway, because I'm pretty sure she probably heard part of it like I did. And, you know, I after I pick my mother up off the floor, you know, and, like, set her on the chair, I go into the bathroom to do some heroin, you know, because I'm just in the most pain that I've ever been in. And I'm just like, okay, like, I'm gonna go fix this, because that's what heroin does for me. It just, like, if I'm hurting, it fixes it, and it's guaranteed. Like, I did some really, really awful things, but then I got high and it didn't matter, you know? And I went into the bathroom and I did some, and I just remember feeling, like, betrayed, because it didn't fix it at all, you know? And, like, when it comes down to it, I've done some awful things because of heroin, you know? A lot of my life has just been destroyed because of it, but, like, heroin itself has always been there for me. It's always done its job, you know, and this was the first time that it wasn't, it just didn't do the job for it. And I've got this thing where I very much personify heroin, you know, and here's, you know, somebody that's never failed me, and you're failing me when I need you most. So, like, I don't want anything to do with you ever again.
So there's a lot going on in this clip, but what impressed me about it and why I'm showing it now is her relationship with this drug. You know, you were there for me. You've been there for me. This is how I deal with pain. So this awful thing happens to my brother, who I love, and dies because of the same drug, you know, and now I'm going to go to you and you're going to help me, you know. And so this is the stuff that that I'm listening to when people are talking about their relationship. How did it work for you? How do you use it? What, in order to get into recovery, what are you going to need to do next time you hit that type of pain? You know, what's going to work as well, you know, and how long have you been learning, you know, that this is the way to solve this problem? So it's a bit of a knot, right? You know, and she can say it though. She said, this is my friend, you know, I have a relationship with this drug, you know, and it helps me and it doesn't help me, you know, and this is a pivotal moment in her recovery. So that's what she's talking about in front of the camera, you know, but that doesn't permanently keep her in recovery. You know, it's a learning moment, a painful moment that put her in one phase of recovery. You know, there'll be multiple times where she works through things later.
Because I really just, like,
you know, there's a neurobiological piece when it comes to addiction. You know, different things get connected that really shouldn't be connected. So for instance, pain for Caitlin, pain and heroin are linked. When I feel pain, this is what I do. So there's the pain that makes you vulnerable to reaching out to begin with. And then there are the links that get formed because you've done it over and over again. So morning and coffee are linked for me, right? There is no morning without coffee for me. You know, if it's a morning without coffee, like I have to do, and I bargain when I have to do, like, you know, the thing with the doctor, you're supposed to fast. And I'm like, well, coffee doesn't count. You can still have coffee, you know? I mean, that's how afraid I am of having a morning without coffee, because they're linked. There's a bond. Now, does that cause damage to my life? No, it does not. Have there been things in the past that I've used when I've dealt with, that have been linked for me? Yes, they have. You know, and so on top of the layer of trauma, we're also looking at what happens in the brain when things get linked that don't belong together. And part of recovery is to unlink those things. When I feel sad, I call my friends. You know, when I feel angry, I go outside for a walk. You know, but when we're thinking about the addictive process, when we've moved from problem behavior into addiction, we're also looking at a wiring of the brain that is different. The beautiful thing about the brain is that it can rewire. Every time I have to learn like Windows changes, like I'd like Windows to stay at Windows 5 or whatever it started at, but no, now we're on Windows 11, you know, and my computer's like, hey, Hope, let's do Windows 11. I'm like, oh, heck no, I'm not doing Windows 11. I barely mastered Windows 10. I like the old fashioned way. I don't want to learn anything new, but yeah, I'm going to be dragged into it. And what happens when I learn Windows 11 is that after the painful learning experience is that I forget I knew Windows 10. You know, so our brains are always changing and wiring and learning new things. The problem with this type of wiring, it's like a flashpoint. You know, if I feel powerless and I gamble and I win, my brain doesn't want to forget it. You know, so this is where addiction and trauma lock each other. You know, so if somebody tells me that I feel powerful when I win and that's why I keep going back, I want to know where they were powerless, because it's almost like the trauma is the inverse. The trauma creates the vulnerability. So a normal person can win gambling, but if you don't have a deficit and feeling powerful, it's not that interesting to your brain. You come in with a deficit, and you hear this in people's stories. The very first time I used that, it was like love. The very first time I tried that, my brain was on fire because there's an underlying vulnerability. Now it can be trauma that causes the vulnerability, neglect. It can be biochemistry. There's multiple pathways to recovery, and there's multiple pathways to vulnerability, which is what's so challenging to all of us in a treatment system, is how can we meet all those needs when it's such a somewhat complicated process. So it's not just I'm sad and I use. Sometimes it's I'm sad and I get high, you know, so that the brain does not forget. And it makes you vulnerable. You know, so for me, I created this slide for me to kind of understand it by the layer. You know, so in the very bottom of the slide, there's traumatic memory networks of things that we learned either as a young person or as an adult that were painful, that cause pain for us. And they can be neglect memories. They can be when we are forced to live using survival skills versus life skills. They can be intergenerational pain, passed from my grandmother to my mother to me. They can be experiences of racism or oppression. You know, so it's pain. It's not so much about what we think of as trauma, but more about what causes pain for individuals. And that pain and the lack of skill that you get when you have to grow up surviving makes you vulnerable to that feeling that I just talked about. Wow, I'm in a lot of pain, but drinking made it go away. Drinking and pain are now linked. Every time something works, the brain kind of hangs on to it. And the more painful the more intense it is, like meth, crack, things that give you a really intense lift are very interesting to the brain. And once those links start to happen, it makes a system that creates more pain, because we can't necessarily, unless we're incredibly wealthy and isolated on an island somewhere, get away with addictive behavior. You know, addictive behavior generally gets us in trouble. You know, has many of the folks I've worked with been incarcerated, has caused women that I work with to lose custody of their children. Most people that I work with have very negative sense of who they are as human beings, which causes more pain and sends you back to the addiction. So that cycle. So wherever you are in the system of treatment, you're addressing one of these layers. Maybe you're working with clients long-term and you can work on the trauma, but maybe you're in detox and you're really working on the addiction memory network level, where people are learning to cope with cravings and urges, you know, or maybe you're working short-term with folks and you're going to help them work on some of the trauma related to the addiction itself. But we're all, as a system, when we're treating folks, in somewhere working in one of these layers. And that's the piece that is so interesting to me and has kind of defined a lot of my curiosity, trying to understand, you know, how some people, trauma will link them to the addiction so intensely, how some people find recovery and some can't seem to, how some, despite their histories, seem to come through with a lot of strengths, and others really have to work to get back their strengths. So interesting to me. But so just to summarize that the whole piece about trauma is that it's not what happens to you, it's what it teaches you about you. You know, it's that, you know, that I'm not safe in my body anymore. You know, I'm not good enough. You know, because that becomes the foundation of the house I build my life on. So if I'm building the house of my life on top of I'm not good enough, I'm not safe in my body, I don't matter, it's going to be a tougher life for me. You know, so some of the work that you're doing with your folks is to try to get them to unlearn what trauma has taught them so they can claim their life again and build the house over, you know, or at least redo some of the foundation. Trauma takes things away from us. It takes away our choice, you know, and it takes away our potential, you know, and it takes away our health and our many other things. And the opportunity, this is from a sculpture I did with a group of folks, never had a chance to be a child. It can take away that wonderful experience that we can all tap into, you know, a good experience as a child. That's a gift when you get that. You can, that's like a well that you dip into your whole life. Not everybody gets that, you know, and they can replenish it, you know, but it's, it can take that away from you. And what it's like to live on survival skills versus life skills. There's a big cost, you know, we lose a lot. Those survival skills kept us alive when we really needed them, but they're not such great skills now. You know? And so many times when clients are coming in, I'm trying to get them to upgrade from survival skills to life skills, but you know what, life skills are harder, you know, at times. They don't always get you what you want. But they, you know, I try to work with my clients to see, but they also don't get you in as much trouble as your survival skills. And they're hard to practice. It's like, you know, when you get a new phone or you get a new, something that, you know, defies you, it's uncomfortable. It's a lot easier just to use the old phone. You know, it's hard to learn new things. So we're not just talking about, you know, this idea that people can't learn them or don't want to learn. It's hard to learn. And you're asking people, hey, Hope, you know, here's something that kind of works for you. I'd like you to put that away, you know, and I'd like you to try this skill that you've never done before that seems kind of soft to you. You know, it's like when I ask a client to think about a calming exercise. They're like, oh, don't be talking about lavender and smelling lavender and taking a bath or drinking a cup of tea. You know, that's not going to work for me. I said, I understand, you know, that feels like a soft skill given what you've been through, but there's value in being in your brain and being calm. You know, when you master that, you'll be able to handle situations in a much more efficient way. You know, it's a big marketing scheme I have to do to convince folks. So trauma and addiction can cause disconnection and fragmentation. Sometimes people will say they feel broken, but I don't think they're broken. I think it's about being disconnected from things and trying to reconnect. You know, that's part of the journey that people talk about, is the reconnect to oneself, rather than thinking about broken. You know, more about how can I reconnect? How can I reconnect to my own body, my own identity, and who I want to be? When we were creating this sculpture for the film Uprooting Addiction, we had a big tree on the wall, and people layered their traumatic experiences on the wall in the sculpture, but also the negative thoughts they had about themselves because of it. When it was time to turn things around, when we were going to create the recovery tree, the question I had for the group is, do we take down the trauma and now put up the recovery, you know, or what do we do? And they said, no, you layer over the trauma. Like, you can't take the trauma away, but you build your life of recovery over it and cover it. You know, you reconnect to some of your strengths. You know, it was a great experience to work through it together in that way. So for recovery, you know, it has to, I think long-term recovery is about trying to create a life worth staying abstinent, if abstinence your goal, you know, staying abstinent for. It's not the goal for everyone, but it's trying to create this life. And what does that look like? For the folks I'm working with, to me, I'm thinking we have to desensitize those addiction memory networks. We do that all the time in detox. We do this all the time in short-term treatment, where we help people deal with their cravings, help them urge serve, help them create skills to use instead. Because addiction memory networks don't stay fired up for all that long. They can be reactivated every time we pick up again. But you don't want people, staying abstinent or having a life staying abstinent for. You want to not be constantly craving. You want to have a network of accessible coping skills and people. You want to be living in the present, so the trauma memory networks aren't opening up all the time. The past incorrectly stored memories aren't informing me about my present in a way that's not helpful. There's things that we learn from the past that when we tap into can be really helpful for us now. But traumatic memory isn't necessarily helpful. It informs us about something that happened in the past that still feels alive in our brain now. So part of recovery is to be able to live in the present and not be a prisoner of the past. And having increased access to a life that looks appealing to us. So many of you in the settings where you work are trying to do that for your clients, trying to help them connect to things that everybody wants. Some sense of family and community, perhaps a job, perhaps a healthy or a safer neighborhood. So if we achieve these things, then addictive behavior is not necessary or as interesting to the brain. Because it really isn't that interesting. It's interesting because of the way we need it when we need it. So my idea of long-term recovery is that I'm not craving anymore. I can make good choices, like I have my choice back. I have coping skills I can use, the ones that I like. So maybe I don't like a certain pathway of recovery, or maybe, I don't want to do certain things, but I have the ones that work for me. And my past, I know, is in my past. It may be unfortunate, some of the things that happen, but it's not ruling me. I know it, I've resolved it as much as one can resolve certain things, and I can make a decision now and go, oh, I know that that's my past telling me I should do this, but I'm going to make this decision now because I am grounded in the present. And I feel like I have a place in the world for me. So I think long-term recovery to me looks like that. And like many people mentioned, it's a journey. It stops along the way. It's a self-definition of what looks good for me along the way. It's me trying out things and seeing if I like them, and having a team of people helping me that kind of roll with me as I make my choices, and maybe make some suggestions for me when I feel totally unsure of where to go. Many of us have encountered my clients who get newly sober don't know what to do with their life now. And I'll have to give them like a list. Well, try this. Have you tried that? Do you think you like this? Trying things and then feeling like the world is open to them when places they felt the doors were closed before. Any questions anybody has at this point? We're like halfway through. It's a lot of me talking, so if you have a question, thought you wanted to throw out there. All right.
Sarah added a comment in the chat.
Okay, yeah, when I screen share, I can't see the chat, but I'm going to pull it up right now. In my opinion, this recovery goal is the key to long-term recovery. Sarah, do you mind unmuting? Just tell me what you mean.
What I meant by that is from my personal experience, and obviously with the work I do today, is that's a whole key, is building a life that's worth fighting for. And what I mean fighting for is, fighting that disease and staying clean. And for me and, a lot of the people I know who I surround myself with today in my life, that's exactly what we've done, is built a life that, it's worth keeping. It's worth staying clean for. And part of that obviously is working on the trauma along with the recovery. So I just think that's key. I took a picture of that and I put it on my phone.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think it's important too, because there are moments in life where when you have that wiring, you're very tempted to return to what you used to do. But when you have the new foundation of your life that's been built, you don't want to lose it. You know, you want to keep it. And you know by then that using again is going to threaten it. And you want other people to have it too. You know, so I, would prefer to sit around and read books and hang out with my dogs and not do presentations. But I do it because I believe that recovery is possible and I want other people to have it. You know, and I lost a brother to addiction, and for a very kind of like an awful reason. It was just that he had trauma. His symptoms were misread as he was kind of, I don't know, resistant. He had terrible insurance, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him in with anybody. And when he did get in, if he missed an appointment, he was considered resistant, rather than somebody asking, hey, what's making it so hard for you to get here? You know, like, I don't have gas today, or I can't ask my sister for help, so there, and all of us know someone like this, right? Some that we're very close to, and some have been our clients, some have been our neighbors, some have been our parents, people whose lives have been lost, so that when we get a good life, part of recovery, and this is why I feel like I don't have to work forever, because my clients get better and they get good lives and they want to help others, and it's like I think all of us are probably here for that reason, is that we see that change is possible and we want other people to have that opportunity. And Julia, did you have a question?
No, actually, for me, and I lost 3 siblings to the disease. I'm in recovery. And for me, even when I got into recovery and started to act in treatment and be in recovery for years, there was a point where I recognized I was still trying to survive and not living. And I think that's when I started to get well, was when I realized I could start living now and stop trying to survive my life. That was the point where I started to really feel well. And that was probably 10 years in. But, all of a sudden I realized, like, life isn't about surviving. It's about now I can live. And when that switch hit, my life went totally into overdrive. Great. I was so used to surviving my whole life that I think even though I was getting all the treatment, I was going into meetings, I was doing, abstinence free, all that, until I realized there was nothing at my back and I could start living. I don't know what happened. There was such a switch for me. But there was a lot of trauma that had to be dealt with. So I guess that's what happened. I mean, nobody said, this is what you need to do. My insides had to do it on its, whenever it happened, it happened. And I recognized it might have been at 12 years. I hate to say that, but I think it took a while. There was a lot, but that was wonderful change for me. I noticed it so internally. It was amazing for me.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. Thank you, Hope.
Thank you. I think recovery happens in layers, so I'm working with a gentleman right now, a young man, and he, recovers. He's recovering from opiate addiction, long-term recovery, but he's doing a different layer right now. I said, this is so exciting. And he's like, this doesn't feel exciting, Hope. This feels like crap, right? This is so exciting. Like, rarely do a lot of people go into recovery and you're able to get abstinent, and you put a nice life together. You're going deep now. You're trying to find out why it's hard to connect with others. And we're going back and we're doing your trauma work so you can have a full recovery, and have a different, the kind of life that you would like, so it's just layers. I think about it. Yeah. That one day you wake up and go, hey, this is worth fighting for. Like what Sarah was saying, I want to fight for this. There are challenges that we're going to encounter as human beings who are all in recovery from pain of some kind, but also challenges that our folks that we work with are going to face. One is about trust. The trust in other human beings is one of the first things that gets broken if your trauma was interpersonal, which for many people it was. Sometimes it's an environmental trauma, so you don't trust the weather, but most of the time it's that you don't trust other human beings, but you so much want to. So a lot of the challenges as we work with people in systems is to see their interest in getting help and how they don't want it, and really trying to help them toggle there and understand, that was the piece I think that was missing for my brother. Why would my brother not show up when he booked this appointment? And why would he not take some of the steps that the therapist recommended? So but it is related very much to his history, and so letting people in, and learning over time. And all of us are participating in that process, no matter what layer you are in a treatment facility, administrator, your direct service staff, your recovery coach, your therapist, you're teaching other people what to expect from people that you ask for help from, in all of the ways that you interact. There's a lot of fears that trauma instills in human beings. People are afraid. They have attachment fears to human beings and also to systems, so there's certain systems that people don't want to work with. Doctors, I have some folks that won't go and get physicals. Some people don't trust the detox system. Some people don't want to work with certain agencies or certain people in the agencies. People are afraid of attachment. People who have trauma are fearful of emotions, both good and bad, because they often trigger something in them. The bad can trigger relapse, but so can the good. How many people do we know that get off probation, go through the whole thing, and then relapse right after when they're celebrating that they're off probation? I have a lot of clients that have done that because they've been in that system so long. It's so familiar. Traumatic memories. So many of you here are probably trying to do trauma work with your clients and realize that they're so afraid to talk about what happened. That's part of how they survived, and body sensations that are connected to those traumas. So a lot of what we're doing, in individual work, in whatever layer you're working, or administratively, is helping people work through some of these fears as they encounter the treatment system. And one of my clients, when I start trauma therapy with people, I get their history, and I know that we're going to go through a lot of attachment stuff. So a lot of it's just me rolling with them and trying to be super consistent with them. Like you can predict me. I dress the same, I wear the same clothes, I have the same expressions, the same sense of humor, the same imperfections, but it's soothing, to go to a therapist who's the same all the time. When I move pieces of furniture, I warn my clients, you moved the couch. Yes, I did. I'm sorry, I moved the couch. I don't like that you moved the couch. Totally understand. Or you look different today. Yes, I went to the dentist and half of my face is compromised by Novocaine because I'm a baby and I need a lot of Novocaine, but even my facial expressions, are important. When I'm just working through that, eventually I will get to the stage where I'm trying to work with my clients to get a sense of the present and being in a calm place, because no matter what trauma therapy you're doing or whatever work you're doing, addiction work you're doing, you're trying to get folks to be in their brain now. And most of my clients don't like that. They're like, you have no idea. Any minute, one of my clients said, it's like there's a burning dumpster in the room, Hope. And you're saying, oh, look at the pretty flowers. And any minute someone could break in the door and hurt us. Like, you're asking a lot. So part of a trauma-informed approach is that I have to acknowledge there's a burning dumpster in the room. Yep, you're right. At any moment, someone could come in, but I think right now there's still value in you and I helping you get back in your body and live in the now for a moment. And if somebody breaks in, we'll be ready for them, well, you'll be ready because you're like living, ready to go, first responder mode, So some of our work in recovery is to convince people that it's okay to feel calm and be in the now. And for us as treatment providers to understand why that isn't a great idea to our clients. So we understand there's different phases to recovery work, and also understanding why it's a challenge if we understand the brain. The other thing to think about is that I have clients that come in that look very resourced. They can figure anything out. They figure out how to get gas money, they get their car, they can work through systems. They call a million times till they get that appointment. Like, they look very strength-based, But really what I'm seeing is a survival skill of what they've had to live through. And we use the word resilient a lot. And I am cautious about that word, having worked with a First Nation group in Canada that cautioned me about that word, that said, saying people can live through something and that they're resilient, that's true. But do you really want to, you also have to call out the system that forced them to be there, and to be careful about how you use that word with your clients. Like, you're so resilient, you're such a survivor. There's a way that is helpful to people. And I think there's a way sometimes it isn't. So I'm just more careful when I'm assessing, is this a survival skill, like burnt into the brain of my client so that she can live, or is this a life skill? So a lot of assessing, are the strengths of our clients and bringing out the strengths that are life enhancing versus the things that take blood to use. And so, examples are my clients who are super efficient, super busy, take care of everybody to the point where their bodies are breaking down, but they're living on their survival skills and working with them to take a day off, to not work so much, to take their vacation time, to ask for help. So I see this a lot in the populations that we serve. I'm just becoming more aware of it as I'm listening to my clients and trying to validate why they have those skills, and also coach and help them learn the skills that are more life enhancing. And also understanding that change is slow and self-defined, so I learned so much from the advice that I've given my clients that has been terrible, from them feeding it back to me. I've been lucky that I work with folks who give it right back to me. Like Hope, that's a stupid idea, and I've learned to really ask when someone won't take a step that seems like a good idea to me, why they won't. And an example is a woman who wanted to go to AA. So not everybody wants to go, but she did. But she couldn't go to AA. She kept saying, I can't, I can't, and I had to say, well, what makes it so that you can't? Tell me a little bit what you've learned about AA. And she told me a lot of things that she learned, that sometimes it's in the basement of a church, and that doesn't feel like a safe place to her. Sometimes everybody sits in a circle, and that reminds her of something that happened in school. When her father used to go to AA meetings when she was a child, he'd come home and he'd hurt her afterwards. So she remembers thinking, well, I don't know what they're doing there, but it can't be good. So intellectually, she knew I should go to AA. She tried it and she liked it. But really, we had to use a trauma-informed approach, because it's almost like I'm asking her to do something like this. I'm yelling at her to swim when there are some steps in place that we can break down to make AA feel safer to her, like a meeting that's not in a church, like working on the trauma with her father, like finding the place that feels right to her, the meeting that feels right to her, going to a women's group, finding what was working for her. Or for my clients who don't want to go to AA, what works for them. And then listening so that I'm not pushing my client to a place that it's hard, for them to achieve their goals, that every barrier to a goal that a client wants to achieve is actually a trauma symptom. So everything that I used to think of as resistance is really, in my mind, where did you learn that you're not worth taking that step? When a client says, I'm not going to get a physical, I'm not going to the doctor, I could think of, well, that's resistance, I suppose. Or where did you learn it's not safe? And then when I hear the stories about what she was told about going to the doctor growing up, we don't go to the doctor, we stay out of doctors' offices. They call child protective systems if you go to the doctor. So after I heard that, I'm like, okay, now I get why you won't go. Let's craft a plan of where you feel safe going to the doctor, or what step you're willing to take. And she was able to do it. But I think she was able to do it because I asked her that question, right? And we broke it down and I said, okay, that makes sense. And I always say the brain. Your brain is telling you that's a bad idea. I totally get that. But I feel like it's less shameful if it's your brain. It's like, yeah, your brain, I'm kind of acknowledging that wiring is there. And that's not you saying, no, I'm not going. That's you, your brain telling you it's not a good idea. So for me, if I think about recovery, you know, it's about reconnection. It's about being in my own body, you know, and being, you know, having my own mind and that I'm in the present, that I am in some sort of family that I want, that I'm a part of the community and I have a sense of purpose. And there's different roles that have helped me achieve long-term recovery over the years. And there are roles that I've seen help others, you know, and there's reasons why I think they work, and I'll talk about them briefly. So not everybody goes to therapy for recovery, you know, but if you do, the reason I think it's helpful is that the therapist can be one of the first people that you work through your attachment fear with. You know, they show up every week and they're reliable, they understand and hear you. It could be the rewiring of people could be trusted for you. You know, the reason I put therapist number 1 through 10, so if I'm therapist number 1 with a client with a complex history, it's not going to be so pretty, right? We're going to spar, we're going to fight. They're not going to show for appointments because they don't trust me, you know, and I need to expect that that's there. And I need to understand that's nothing to do with me. Maybe it is about me though, and we need to talk about that. Maybe there's something the client doesn't like and we could talk about that. But if I'm therapist number 1, my sole job is to just make this idea of therapy feel safe. If I'm therapist number 10, I'm seeing people, you know, get sober, stay sober, define their recovery, get married, send me pictures of their wedding. You know, I've been lucky to be therapist number 10 sometimes, you know, but I'm okay being therapist number 1. You know, I think so when you are working with your clients who are in the system, who may have multiple therapists, you understand that therapist number 1 has an important role, but it's really about making the place feel safe and listening and helping people learn how to talk about themselves and helping them know the boundaries. I had one client come in, I think I'm therapist number 5. She said, I've been fired from like 5 other therapists, so let's just get the rules out right now. What will you tolerate and what will you not? I said, all right, good, let's talk about the rules. I like texting, right? I hate phones. Like, I'm so glad they invented texting. I'm never going to answer my phone again, you know, but texting I like. And I don't mind if my clients text me within reason. So we came up with rules, when she could text me, when I would answer, when she needs to tell me when the text means I need to call a mobile crisis, or when it's just she's having a hard time, you know. So she wanted to know the rules. I thought it was so awesome. But 5 therapists before her taught her the rules. And unfortunately, one of the things she learned is if you try to kill yourself and you go to the hospital, your therapist will fire you while you're there. So we talked about the rules of being suicidal, going in the hospital, and how I would not fire her, and we would stay together, and it happened and it worked. You know, so I'm therapist number 5. There's going to be others after me. Trauma work, for those of the psychotherapists that are doing trauma work or in group or individual work, is helping your clients update those trauma memory networks that we talked about, helping people have their trauma and pain inform them, but not lead their life. So for me, that's EMDR, that's what I do, but there's other forms, many forms of trauma therapy, and there's many ways to heal. I just happened to get trained in EMDR and stuck with that, but there's trauma-focused CBT, there's exposure therapies. But for me, the trauma work was essential for my recovery. If I didn't do it, I don't think I'd be here today. But my pathway is different than anyone else's, you know. So for some people, that's going to be an important piece. For others, maybe not so important. But it should be offered, you know. It should be a possibility. Skill building groups, super helpful to learn how to live and upgrade to life skills. Recovery coaches have a special role in helping people with attachment and helping people address the shame and encouraging them. Body-based practitioners can be really helpful to help people reconnect to their body. Case managers, you know, the folks that help you navigate and trust systems in the world are extremely helpful, because part of reconnection is that we get back in our body again, and maybe we get back in the present, and now we want to get back in our life, but we don't know how to do it, you know, or maybe our history makes it hard. You know, maybe it's harder to get a job, and we need to learn how to talk about our history when we have a job interview, you know, or when we I was navigating back when you couldn't get Narcan as easily. I had gotten it through my insurance, and so I just got it from I got it from CVS. Somebody helped me get it, and then my doctor saw it show up in my record. And the next appointment I had, she's like, "Well, let's talk about this Narcan and you. Let's talk about why you need that." I'm like, no, I'm using it for work. And she's like, seriously, Hope, you can tell me. We know you have a history. I'm like, no, I'm actually using it for work. Like navigating systems. That made me a little nervous. Everything goes in my chart, and every doctor I work with sees it. But my clients have much bigger histories, and those histories can be a barrier sometimes. And so coaching people how to talk with your doctor, how to talk with somebody who's hiring you, how to talk to a volunteer job, and how to, the community connections that you can make through agency work and the different roles has helped correct a worldview that systems are in place to hurt me, or reject me. And medication management plays a big role for many folks in new in recovery. So these are the things that kind of address every way that trauma, and I'm sure I miss some, trauma and addiction can impact us, and the layers and why each helps. But I think I wanted people in the audience to understand the importance of your work just by doing what you do. By offering hope, by being consistent, by offering choices, you're already doing a lot of work. There's the direct trauma work where we go over memories and we restore the memories correctly, upgrade the memory storage. But then there's this work, which is equally important of what we offer. For me, I had to, in order to do the work I do, I had to reframe some of the ways I was raised to think about substance use or addiction, and also how I was trained to, because I've been doing this so long. I've gone through multiple types of training, I remember sitting in meetings thinking, it sure seems like we're blaming the client here. Every one of my clients is resistant or not making it or not doing what they were supposed to do. I'm so grateful that we're not doing that anymore. That instead we're trying to figure out, why wouldn't that client take that path? What other path could we offer that client? But so for me, I had to upgrade and still continually upgrade my ideas about what recovery looks like, and also how I look at it. So ambivalence is normal now. I understand it that way. I can help clients work through ambivalence. But the alliance that I offer, the person I'm with, is more important than any method I know. Like, I'm very involved in training people in EMDR, but the truth is the most important piece is the human connection I make with another person. And it's a collaboration where we each have expertise to bring to the table. And that my style has had to be empathic, but direct. Like, I get it that this past has caused this situation for you, and I totally understand, yet you still need to do this. Or I think this is what you need to do. Or what do you think you need to do? So the young man I was talking about recently, we have a nice relationship. It's very honest. He's really honest with me. And at one point he was making some choices, and I said, that doesn't seem to fit the values that you've described to me. And I said at one point, the way you talk about women, and I'm a woman, it makes me feel like you're not very evolved. And he was laughing. I said, don't you want to be an evolved man? Like, what are you doing? We're just joking because that's our style. But I was coaching him and saying, is this really what you want? Now, if he said, yes, this is what I want, then, we'll continue it. But he said, no, it isn't what I want. I do want to do this. Thank you for bringing that up. Personally, me, I love direct styles. I like flexibility and also understanding, but I also like people to call me on things and say things. I don't necessarily have to agree with them. I don't agree with the choices of many of my clients. They don't agree with my directions, but we stay connected. And there again is where you're making that repair. Learning that I can disagree with someone and they're not going to fire me. I can disagree with someone and she keeps being kind to me. It's okay. So there's so many indirect things that happen in a system when you're dealing with folks, helping them find recovery, that are really helpful. So that if you think you're not doing enough, you might want to rethink it. So to me, resistance is a trauma symptom. So it's just easier for me to not look at the word, not use the word resistance anymore. That when someone needs to take a step, they are unable to make that step, and it's a viable, good option for them, like maybe going to detox or taking a step to make themselves safer. Then I understand they learned something about themselves growing up, that they weren't worth it, or this isn't a safe step, and that the client and I can talk about it, talk through it. That saved me and kept me in the field, because I'm telling you, there are times when I really thought driving a food truck would be a lot better, you know, because people would order food for me, they'd smile, I'd give them the food, and it'd be so much more simple than this, where I am, is this intervention helping? Is this helping? Am I doing anything good here? You know, it's so unclear sometimes at the end of the day, except that I know my intent was there to be helpful. And I've had to just live with that. You know, but it's really kept me in the field longer than I thought I would be. To me, I see addiction as a trauma symptom. Not everybody sees it that way, and not everybody has to see it that way. It's just over time, I've just learned to look at it that way, and it's made it easier for me to conceptualize a treatment plan that makes sense to me. But each person's very unique, and so that's what also keeps the work so alive for me. Is there really is no one cookie cutter way to do this, no one treatment plan for everyone. It really starts with, what did you learn, you know, about yourself growing up? What do you think made you vulnerable to this? And what is the path you think that's going to work best for you? And that there's choices, because abuse and neglect don't give you choice, you know, and when we're traumatized, our brains get programmed in a way that don't give us choice. You know, so the other part of long-term recovery is getting our choice back, and what better place to learn it than in treatment. And to understand, you know, I understand that the things that play out in sessions sometimes, or in appointments, or in the lobby, before the person even gets in the room, on the phone, is often people playing through some old stuff. Some people come to my office so triggered already by just being there, that they're in a fight mode. You know, and I had one client come in, her first appointment, this place is not safe, you're not safe, I hate it here. And then I, you know, said all the wrong things. I'm like, oh, okay, well, if this doesn't feel right, maybe we should look at another place. Now you don't want to work with me, you're firing me before. I'm like, okay, breathe, sit down, let's start over, you know, and tell me why it feels unsafe. And there were legitimate reasons why it felt unsafe. All right, let's come up with a different time of day where this person is not milling around the building that makes you feel unsafe. Let's come up with a different, you know, understanding of what, you know, of how we can keep therapy yours, you know, and she and I came up with some very creative ways to work through it, you know, and so I try to understand those symptoms, because it's important to our therapy, and it's important for me to be curious with the client, because the most empowering thing is the client understanding her own brain. You know, what's empowered me more than anything is knowing when I'm triggered and why, you know, and then what I could do differently, you know, and I needed to have people stay with me long enough for me to learn that. You know, at one point in treatment, a therapist thought was being helpful, but in front of an entire group of people was giving everybody a coin for being 30 days sober. And she said, I'm not giving it to Hope because she's not going to make it. You know, she's not going to make it. I forget, she won't ask for help. And see all these people out here, they're going to make it, you're not. And I think the intervention was meant to kind of wake me up. And now later, she's not here anymore. It did actually, because what it did was it made me fight really hard. Like, I'm not going to make it. Not only am I going to make it, I'm going to be in your face every day. I'm going to be sitting in the front row raising my hand. I mean, I think later she was a genius. Like because I was just floating along, doing recovery my way and not asking for help. And she must have laughed afterwards, because I was in the front row relapse prevention group every week with my hand up. What an interesting thing. But what have been really helpful for her to say to me later is, Hope, why won't you ask for help? Because if she had asked me, I knew the answer. You know, I just knew pragmatically, I'd already learned you're not supposed to talk about your past. You're just supposed to stay in your recovery. But I could have told her, oh, this is what happened when I asked for help. We could have worked through it. So it was a missed opportunity that I think, and that was years ago. So I think now we're asking those questions, you know, and looking at trauma symptoms, or looking at people's reactions a little differently. So it's like a paradoxical intervention that I think she helped me, but I think it would have saved me several years of relapsing after. If she had asked, why won't you ask for help? And we worked on that. I think it would have mattered a lot to me because I would have known, oh, that's why I don't want to do this. Okay, well, how do I work through it? Give me some strategies, because I was eager to learn, but I needed people to ask the right questions. So some of this is like looking at these symptoms or behavioral patterns and then asking deeper questions so people can figure their own brains out, because we only have a short time with them. They have their brains 24/7, so, and that can be life-saving. So many of you have said something to a client at one point that they are now talking about with another therapist. It's amazing the impact, a small thing. That woman net wrestling my coin for me taught me more right then. She probably forgot about it the next day. Changed my life. So don't forget that. Don't underestimate well-intentioned interventions and how they can help. Things, effective treatment for me is client-centered and very hopeful. I've seen people come in with tremendously difficult stories who have tremendous recovery. Everybody is capable of change. Our brain is capable of change. Until people are ready to take steps that might keep them safe, therapy or coaching or whatever role you're in involves harm reduction, which I think as a community we've all agreed on, that harm reduction is going to be important, but also staying connected is equally important. So when I transfer somebody to a higher level of care, if I can see them when they come back, I do. If I can't, I tell them the truth and I can't, but that connection, you can either reenact the old trauma with the clients or you can teach them something new. I try to offer a balanced approach. One of the things I think that was missing in our field that also is changing is that being overly focused on addiction or overly focused on the diagnostic symptoms without being curious about what caused them can also be hurtful for clients. To have both is going to be, I think, life-saving. Was life-saving for me, which is what many of my family members who I've lost did not get. This ability to let's look at your pain too. Let's make sense of it for you, and let's also keep an eye on the things that you're doing that are dangerous. I think we can do both. I believe all systems should have evidence-based trauma treatment as an option. I worked in one system in Massachusetts where you got to choose like what kind of recovery entry-level group you wanted. Did you want seeking safety? Did you want DBT? Did you want this? Did you want that for skill building? And then when you were in a good place and stable, what kind of trauma-focused treatment do you want? This is what CBT would be like. This is what EMDR is like. I mean, this is my dream world, but I think we're all getting closer to it, to choose which one might work better for your brain. For me, EMDR worked great for my brain. CBT probably wouldn't work as well for me. Some people are going to find CBT, or different types of trauma therapies more helpful than others. But isn't it nice to have a choice, and not have an organization make the choice for you? Would be ideal. Have a choice of which. This is a little short video from our friend Gabor Mate. It just kind of, in some ways, covers a little bit of a review of what we just talked about.
Not experiencing love at that moment. No, but you got to stay attached. Guess what you're going to suppress? The authenticity every time. And this is how we lose connection to ourselves and to our gut feelings. So that, strangely enough, that very dynamic, which is essential for human survival in a natural setting, not becomes a threat to our survival in this more modern setting, where to stay authentic is to threaten attachment. And so we give up our authenticity, and then we wonder who the hell we are, and whose life is this, and who's experiencing all this, and this life doesn't, and who am I really? And so that's where the reconnection has to happen. That's where the healing happens, is with that reconnection. But it's because of that conflict, that tragic conflict in childhood between authenticity and attachment that most of us face, that we lose ourselves and lose connection to our gut feelings. Now, this leads to the question of trauma, because it's one thing to recognize that all this originates in childhood pain. It's quite another to transform that pain. And for that, we have to understand what trauma is. So people often think that trauma is what happens to you. So trauma is a divorce when you were small and your parents fighting. Trauma is your mother's depression. Trauma is your father's alcoholism. Trauma is your parents' argumentation. Trauma is physical or sexual abuse or some loss. Those aren't the traumas. Those are traumatic. But the trauma is not what happens to you. The trauma is what happens inside you. And as a result of these traumatic events, what happens inside you is you get disconnected from your emotions, and you're disconnected from your body, and you have difficulty being in the present moment, and you develop a negative view of your world, and a negative view of yourself, and a defensive view of other people. And these perspectives keep showing up in your life in the present. So in other words, the addiction is not the primary problem. It's an attempt to solve a problem. And then the real question is, how did the problem arise? In other words, this is where my theory is that it's always rooted in childhood trauma, and that the addiction is an attempt to deal with the effects of childhood trauma, which it does temporarily, while it creates even more problems in the long term. And so the issue is not just to recognize what happened 10, 15, 30, however many years ago, but to actually recognize the manifestations in the present moment and to transcend them. And how do you do that? By reconnecting with yourself, by restoring the connection with your body primarily and with your emotions that you lost. And once you do, when you found these things again, then you have what we call recovery. Because what does it mean to recover something? It means to find it again. So what is it that people find when they recover? They find themselves. And the loss of self is the essence of trauma. So the real purpose of addiction treatment, mental health treatment, any kind of healing is reconnection.
Yeah, so that's Gabor Mate. Many of you have probably been exposed to Dr. Mate, but he has a very compassionate approach to looking at addiction and trauma. So it's about reconnection, and what helps reconnection? It's individual and systemic responses, to me, that include a sense of safety or consistency, that we avoid as a system or individually any roles that mimic past trauma. So cutting people off or being abusive in our approach, or benignly observing people's pain. These are the things that happen to folks that are traumatized. They've been cut off or abused. They've had someone in their life who just watched them suffer, or they had someone in their life who responded passively or hopelessly. And so I think we're always trying to, as a system, not do this, not have this kind of response, so that people can feel safe in our systems and with us. And it might mean that there's just some realities. We can't see you every week. We just can't do it. But this is why, and this has nothing to do with you. Has to do with the demand on the system, but this is what we can do. So some things are just reality also. There's the ideal world for treatment, and then there's reality, like availability. I'm not available 24/7 to my clients, but I am, they know when I am available, and they know when I'm not. So I was doing a training the other day, and I was just dancing as fast as I could. And one of my clients was in crisis. And I said, listen, I am doing a training. I can't text you back right away, but I want you to know why. She writes back, I know you'll write back when you can. I said, okay, good. I just want you to know that I'm here, but I won't be here until 5 o'clock tonight. And then at 5, I'm going to be exhausted. So, she knows me and I know her, and I'm available to her when I can be. Just when I worked at agencies, I was not available 24/7. Mobile Crisis was available, or other groups of people were available. And I had to work with my clients to understand those boundaries. It's not bad to have boundaries, and we can't be available all the time, but availability should be clear. And then options for each stage of change and multiple pathways. And these things are super familiar probably to the group, and already things I know as a system that you're working on. And like in Gabor's video, he said it's about reconnecting to the self again, and reconnecting to the community. Finding your place. It's an act of justice, for yourself. So when, I worry a lot when people come in and they're so defined by their diagnosis. They're defined by their PTSD, they're defined by their addiction diagnosis. And one of the messages, that I want them to take from therapy is that bad things happen to you and that was not okay. But I am not going to in therapy teach you how to live with the symptoms of the bad thing. Part of therapy is to help you overcome it. Part of trauma work is to redefine yourself. You had the bad thing happen, but it doesn't need to lead you around, and to find where you belong in the world. And there is justice in that. It's not fair what happened to you, but let's do some therapy so you can reclaim some things. Let's do therapy so you can have the life that you want. And as systemically, and as a social worker, this is really important to me. I want people to feel that life and have the life that they should have, that they choose. So therefore, treatment, so recovery is not a noun, and neither is treatment. Treatment should be flexible, and our systems should be flexible. I've had to learn a lot of humility and understanding what's helpful and not helpful to human beings. I have been trained in many models that I've totally bought into and that I don't believe in anymore. And so I've had to admit I don't know what I don't know, and there's so much I still don't know, about treatment. And I'm okay with that, and I just got a brand new book. I'm like gonna read it and try to shift, and it's changed since I did this PowerPoint. It made me aware of the multiple vulnerabilities. I got so focused on trauma in my field, I forgot there are other things that make people vulnerable to addiction, other forms of pain, and that's why I'm using the word pain a little more. And it means that I have to be kind of brave and put myself on my own growth edge sometimes, do things, be curious. The new thing that's challenging me now is psychedelics as a pathway of recovery for some, and in my field, in the trauma world, everybody's getting trained on about how to use psychedelics in therapy. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm just going to say, I think I'm biased against it because I've lived through generations of treatment where every new drug was a new cure. And some of those cures didn't work very well. And I'm suspicious of pharmacology, but I'm going to try to be curious about it because I'm going to have clients that want that pathway and I want to understand how it works. And so I'm studying it and trying to understand how it works in the brain. And I'm trying to be humble until I understand it a little more. So my new book I got yesterday defines recovery as a process of ongoing positive change rather than simply the absence of a pathology. It is stable improvements in functioning and purpose in life. So that all the definitions that people gave me before, that kind of makes sense to me. This moving forward, this idea that it's a path, that it's a journey. He also wrote in this book, and this book is called The Urge by Carl Fisher. It just was released yesterday, and that's how geeky I am. I already got it because he had an article in the New York Times talking about his belief that addiction is not a disease, which everybody's kind of has different feelings about. There's a lot of feistiness in our field, so people get wed to different ideas, and it's threatening. Change can be threatening. But he said in one of his quotes, probably my favorite quote, he said, "What would it mean if we saw the opportunity to recover as a right, and we had the political and moral imagination to confront all the ways that right is routinely denied to many?" And then he also says at the end of the book, "We will not end addiction, but we must find ways of working with it, ways that are sometimes gentle, sometimes vigorous, but never warlike, because it is futile to wage a war on our own nature." So big book, not done with it. I just like to read parts of the book. But just those statements alone also reminded me of the width of what we're working with. So we're not talking about an individual disorder that people struggle with. We're talking about a community-wide issue. We're talking about the brain and our human nature and the way that addiction challenges us in recovery. And we're talking about systems that create pain that make people vulnerable. So, everybody here comes from a different part of a system. This is why I said yes to presenting to this group, because I'm aware that you're all working in a system, and I thought, what a great audience, people that are doing the same thing, and want the same thing. Because when we help people make choices, when we help them live in the now, we're offering them the opportunity to experience freedom, and when that happens, every one client you work with goes back and changes things in their family. Every person that you help find freedom changes things in their community. Many of my clients become activists, so don't underestimate, the efforts that you're making, how they have that ripple effect, because it's just super important. And the documentary project I'm involved with is called Uprooting Addiction. DMHAS is hosting the film on their website, so you can see it. And I hope you share it with clients for the time that they're hosting it, because it's about the connection between trauma and addiction, and it can be helpful for the clients. So I did it. This is my first time in doing this presentation. It's done before the end of time, which is good. Any questions or thoughts about it? I mean, every one of you is doing this, so